Most neighbors argue about things like loud music, parking spaces, or a fence that sits 2 inches too far on the wrong side of a property line. My problem with my neighbors started over something much smaller, a couple of gas cans. But by the time it was over, they had destroyed multiple vehicles, spent thousands of dollars trying to fix them, and they never dared touch another thing on my property again. The funny part is that in the beginning, I didn't even realize they were stealing from me. Several years ago, my friend, let's call him Boris, and I had a tradition every spring. When winter finally loosened its grip and the ground started to thaw, we would spend a couple of weekends helping each other clean up our properties. It was the kind of work nobody really enjoys, but somehow becomes fun when you're doing it with a friend. We'd spend long days outside cutting down damaged trees from winter storms, clearing brush, fixing fences, and preparing the garden plots for planting season. After months of snow and neglect, the yards always looked terrible, and the spring cleanup was our way of resetting everything. That year, we planned to start at my place first. I had a lot of work to do, so the Friday before the big cleanup, I spent the entire evening preparing. I sharpened the chains on my chainsaw, cleaned up the mower blade, organized tools, and checked all the equipment we would need the next day. Anyone who has done yard work like that knows preparation is half the battle. One of the last things I did that night was mix fuel for the 2-cycle equipment. For chainsaws and some other tools, you have to mix gasoline with a specific type of oil. I poured everything carefully into my gas cans so it would all be ready to go in the morning. By the time I finished organizing everything and putting the tools away, it was getting late. And I remember feeling satisfied that the next day would run smoothly. The next morning, Boris showed up right on time, around 8 o'clock, carrying coffee and a bag of biscuits. That alone was reason enough to keep him as a friend. We sat on the tailgate of his truck, drinking coffee, eating breakfast, and going over the plan for the day. The air was cool, the sun was just starting to warm things up, and it felt like the perfect start to a productive morning. While we were sitting there talking, our neighbors drove past. Now, these neighbors were interesting people. Let's call them Rocky and Bullwinkle. Their car was an old Chevy Cavalier that looked like it had already lived 3 different lives before they got their hands on it. The thing rattled, coughed, and smoked like a dying locomotive every time it moved. As they drove past us that morning, thick gray smoke poured out of the exhaust like a fog machine. Boris watched the car disappear down the road and shook his head. "Man," he said, laughing, "I bet they don't even buy gas. They probably just pull up to the pump and fill it with motor oil." We both laughed and went back to finishing breakfast, thinking nothing more about it. Then we got up to start working. The first thing I went to grab was one of my gas cans so we could fire up the chainsaw and mower. I walked over to where I had left them the night before and stopped. The cans weren't there. At first I thought maybe I had moved them somewhere else while cleaning up, so I checked the garage, then the shed, then behind the mower, and finally the workbench. Nothing. Every single gas can was gone. Not just the mixed fuel, not just 1 or 2 cans, every single one of them. The regular gas, the mixed gas, even the empty spare cans. Gone. Boris could see the confusion on my face as I walked back toward the driveway. "What's wrong?" he asked. "My gas cans are missing." We both stood there for a moment while the realization slowly formed. Then we both thought about the same thing at exactly the same time. That smoking Chevy Cavalier we had seen earlier. Suddenly, the joke Boris had made didn't seem quite so funny anymore. They hadn't filled up with oil. They had filled up with my gas. I'll admit it, I was furious. But there wasn't much we could do right then. We had an entire day of work planned and no fuel to run any of the equipment. So instead of starting the cleanup, Boris and I had to pile back into his truck and drive into town to buy new gas cans, gasoline, and more 2-cycle oil. It was annoying, expensive, and a huge waste of time. By the time we got back, I was still irritated, but we got to work anyway. Throughout the day, Rocky and Bullwinkle drove past the house several times, and every time that smoking car went by, it made my blood boil a little more. But we couldn't prove anything, and confronting them without proof would only cause more problems, so I let it go, at least for the moment. A couple of weeks passed and life moved on. Boris and I finished our cleanup projects, and I tried not to think about it. Then one evening, we had a family dinner at my wife's grandparents' house. It was one of those long dinners where people sit around talking for hours after the food is gone. Toward the end of the night, most people had left, and I was sitting with my wife's grandfather, having a couple drinks and talking about random things. Eventually, I excused myself to use the restroom, and that's when I saw it. Sitting in the corner of the laundry room was a gas can, but not just any gas can. It had a very distinctive paint mark on the side that I had put there myself. It was one of mine. I walked back out and casually asked the old man where the can came from. "Oh," he said, "Rocky and Bullwinkle left it here a while ago." Of course they had. I calmly explained that it actually belonged to me. When I went back out to my truck, I noticed another one sitting near the porch. I loaded both of them up and took them home. But even after getting those cans back, something about the whole situation kept bothering me. Every time that beat-up Cavalier drove by my house, I remembered how they had taken my gas without asking, and eventually that irritation turned into an idea. Not a good idea, but a very effective one. I decided that if they liked stealing gas so much, I would give them some. I went out and bought several gallons of gasoline, a few gallons of diesel fuel, and some other random oils. Then I mixed them together into a horrible chemical cocktail inside a brand new 6-gallon gas can. It was basically the worst possible fuel mixture you could imagine for an engine. Then I waited. One evening I filled my mower with clean fuel and mowed part of the yard while Rocky and Bullwinkle were outside. I made sure they saw me using the gas can. After I finished, I carried the equipment back inside, but I forgot the new gas can. I left it sitting right there in the open. The next morning, I went to work like normal and didn't even think about it until I got home that afternoon. The first thing I did when I pulled into the driveway was look for the gas can. It was gone. My wife met me at the door, smiling. "Your plan worked," she said. Apparently, she had watched Rocky and Bullwinkle walk over earlier that day and help themselves to the gas can. Later, they drove off in the Cavalier, and according to her, the car was sputtering, coughing, and smoking worse than she had ever seen before. And then, it never came back. About an hour later, there was a knock at my door. Rocky and Bullwinkle were standing there looking stressed. They explained that their car had broken down on the side of the road and asked if I could come take a look at it. I told them I had a migraine and had just gotten home from a long day of work, maybe tomorrow. That's when panic appeared on their faces. They admitted the car had no insurance and was sitting on a busy road. I simply shrugged. Not my problem. Later that night, Highway Patrol found the abandoned car and had it towed. Between impound fees, registration issues, and insurance problems, it was going to cost them around $500 to get it back. The car wasn't even worth that much, so they lost it. You would think that would have been the end of the story, but somehow those two always seemed to stumble into good luck. A local church pastor gave them an old Ford Taurus not long after. Unfortunately for them, they still liked borrowing my gas. It took a few more cans of my special fuel, but after about a month, the engine locked up completely. That car died in their grandparents' driveway, and they ended up scrapping it. Then tax return season rolled around, and they used the money to buy a Ford F-150 pickup. For a little while, it seemed like they had finally learned their lesson. But then the truck started smoking. Badly. Eventually, they took it to a mechanic who discovered what had been happening. Cleaning and repairing the fuel system cost them around $1,500. After that, something interesting happened. None of my gas ever went missing again. And sometimes when that truck drove by, I would catch Rocky or Bullwinkle glancing nervously toward my driveway, as if they were wondering what might happen if they helped themselves to something again. I never said a word about it, but the message had been delivered loud and clear, and sometimes that's the best kind of revenge.